So every so often you pick up a nonfiction book that gives voice to an idea you think you already had in your head, and it fills it out in compelling detail so that it becomes one of the thoughts that you carry with you into the world. Our conversation today is with just such an author and just such an idea. The idea is that attention has become the most scarce resource of our time, and that we are being bombarded with constant demands for it that leave us all a little bit insane. And the raft of favorable reviews emphasize that this is an idea that captures a key component of our frenzied and off-kilter lives. So well, in fact, that this just in, as they say in the media, I have the honor of announcing that Sirens Call is going to debut at number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list, both for nonfiction and fiction and nonfiction combined. That's tomorrow morning, so timing is everything. You've come at a very good time. And the author of this idea is Chris Hayes, the New York Times bestselling author of A Colony in a Nation and Twilight of the Elites, and for the last 12 years, the Emmy Award-winning host of All In with Chris Hayes on MSNBC, where daily he brings home important and difficult ideas with clarity, incisiveness, and quick wit. I'm doing a lot less TV these days for many reasons, but there's one show I never say no to. That is All In with Chris Hayes. Please join me in welcoming the author of Sirens Call, Chris Hayes.
Hey guys. Thank you. Thank you.
You seem to have struck a timely chord. Do you get that idea?
Yeah, it's funny. Even over the course of the writing of the book, when I started it a few years ago, and I would meet someone, and I would talk about writing a book, and they'd be like, "What's it on?" I would say attention. They would sort of be like, "Oh, huh, attention, okay." Like attention, like attention. Like no, like attention, like our attention. And it's pretty striking that even in the course of the 2 to 2.5 years it took to come to culmination. Now when I say it, people are like, totally, yes, exactly. And I think that moment, there's a really clarifying moment on January 20th where you had the new president being sworn in, who I think is distinguished above all else in his instinct for attentional dominance. And then in the front row were the sort of billionaire fortunes made by the harvesting of attention, from Apple's use and deployment of the iPhone in 2007, which really sort of starts the attention age, to the Google CEO, to X, to Bezos, who actually dominates attention in a bunch of interesting ways I talk about in the book. And so there was this kind of interesting tableau of like, right, here are the kind of the barons of this age. Who have kind of gotten their hands on this scarce resource and are now wielding it to their own benefit. I
mean, it's really true. It's like a little the robber barons of the tribe, and these are the Rockefellers and Fords, and it unmistakable, they were, members of Congress were kicked out so that they could occupy the front row of the inauguration. Let's zero in a little on this central concept of the book, attention. A lot of the argument, I think, explains how it is our most valuable resource, and it's now being bought, sold, manipulated. And it's clear that you think we've lost something essential as a result. And there are different ways you sort of talk about that, at least anecdotally, but what would you say we've lost as a result of this attention age?
Well, the first thing I would say is that attention is the substance of life. It's all we have moment to moment in our lives. When all is said and done, what our life amounts to will be what we paid attention to in every moment, whether that's the precious time we've spent with people we've loved, whether it's work that we've put our effort and toil into that we feel proud of, but it's also the substance of consciousness. And William James, writing in the 19th century in Principles of Psychology, is writing about attention because his prime philosophical preoccupation is free will and the degree to which we have it. And for him, attention is inseparable from free will because it's the ability to volitionally direct the beam of thought. So what I would say, the short answer to the question of what we've lost is dominion over our own minds. Like, truly control and dominion over our own minds. And part of the reason for that is the kind of complex phenomenon that is attention, which maybe I'll take a second to sort of walk through.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Sorry, I've been talking a lot over the last 2 weeks, so I have these intrusive thoughts of like, shut up, you've been...
Megaphone
My God,
guy.
you really have been talking a lot, so...
We'll let you know. I think it's okay. Yeah.
We'll get the cane out here. So the most important, from a kind of evolutionary standpoint and from sort of our biological wiring, the most important faculty of attention is what's called involuntary attention, which is if someone came screaming through that door right now, everyone's attention would move to them immediately. And it would move to them immediately before your conscious will got a chance to weigh in. We've all had experiences if you're in a cocktail party and a waiter shatters a glass, right? If you, God forbid, have ever been in a setting where a gunshot goes off, or a firecracker, or the siren, as the book says, wailing down the street, a baby crying on a plane. In all of these places, the core evolutionary feature is that it wrenches us towards that thing, which is necessary for our survival because we want to be able to detect the predator rustling in the bushes. We also have voluntary attention, which is what all of you are very kindly doing right now, which is directing through your volition, through your will, your attention onto something. And part of the conundrum of this moment, the sort of metaphor I use of Odysseus who's lashed himself to the mast to avoid the call of the sirens, is this tension and interplay between that compelled involuntary attention and what we want to pay attention to. And that the nature of the attention age, when this resource has become so scarce, so valuable, and so intensely competed over, is that competitive attention markets and sophisticated platforms of attention capitalism will tend to drive towards compelled attention. If the way you can get people's attention is to grab it somehow, the haptic feedback that's engineered into the phone so that it buzzes in your pocket, you notice that before you get a chance whether you want to notice it or not. That's engineered into the device. The mechanisms of interruption that have become kind of the fabric of daily life, that we're caught in this trap between very powerful technologies and market structures that are there to capture this thing from us and our own volition over where we want to put our minds.
You know, this evolutionary idea is really interesting. This may be half-baked, but as you were saying it, I'm thinking of certain mental disease issues that we have with especially anxiety and depression, and they seem to be based on instincts or needs we had as hunter-gatherers, whatever, to fear or flight, that have gone haywire in the modern age, and it may be in a similar way. We're wired to attend quickly to the person coming through the door, but now we transport that to a life in which it's coming from everywhere. You use the great essay, The Megaphone Guy by George Saunders, and he talks about a notion we're at a party, and there's this guy with a megaphone, literally louder and louder and louder, and sort of instinctively, you raise your voice to follow it, and the way you actually put it, well, this is actually how Saunders puts it, it's not just that person, and maybe we'll get to analogies later, but is saying stupid things, but Saunders and you say, we all get stupider as a result. So it has a way of actually debasing our social discourse that we're bombarded all the time with these efforts to make us attend.
Yeah, I think there's profound implications both in the most intimate moments of our life, which is the cherished time you spend with loved ones, and also in the way that it structures public discourse. There's actually, this is not in the book because I was actually just reading this. There's increasing evidence, again, this is not dispositive, so I don't want to overclaim here, but there's some pretty decent evidence coming in that there's this thing called the Flynn effect, which is that as societies get richer, the aggregate collective IQ increases of the society, which in some ways shows that like IQ isn't measuring something actually innate and biological, it's measuring something about the aggregate conditions of a set of people. There's data starting to come in that like Americans in aggregate on cognitive testing are declining. And it's funny that everyone nods their head. No one's like, couldn't be us. Like, yep, checks out, sounds about right.
Yeah.
And I do think that there's probably a relationship between this lack of dominion over our own minds and that. And to your point, I mean, a hallmark of madness is lack of dominion over your own mind. Yeah. That's kind of the constitutive feature of all kinds of mental health maladies we have, which is I've many loved ones in my life have fought and battled this and been through it, and including some very dear people to me. That is the feature of it, right? That you do have intrusive thoughts, that you do fall into compulsive loops, that you do hear you hear voices, right? That these are all aspects of of mental health conditions that are adjacent to the sensation of not being able to control where you put your own thoughts. And I think the sensation, to go back to the Brain Dead Megaphone, the Saunders essay, which is great and I recommend people read it, is a kind of swirling public madness that is the tenor of public debate at a time when all of these different forms of structuring attention, what I call in the book attentional regimes, have really broken down. We're left with this kind of Hobbesian war of all against all.
That's what really struck me is you analogize to individual social disease, but you see it as a social problem. There's this great, it's not your phrase, Graham Burnett's phrase of we're getting our minds fracked, and what that, and he talks about it in terms of mental illness. I wanted to put a little bit of pressure on the idea in just this way. You talked about William James, and in the book there's this essay of sort of a priggish essay from 1894, decrying the loss of attention span. But more than that, an image that stuck with me from you is you're 11 and you're reading the cereal box. We've all done it. We're just there and nothing. So we're reading the cereal box, and similarly, I was put in mind of certain Eastern disciplines that talk about, the monkey mind. Mm-hmm. And so here would be the notion for you to rebut. Is it maybe just a perennial part of the human condition that it doesn't matter if the stimulus is at 2 or at 12 as it is now, it's nevertheless just the case that 'twas ever thus.
Yeah.
We were always kind of like this and now it's louder, but it's not. You sort of posit that something different happened like 15 years ago or so, and so there's the question.
So I think it's a great question. Like basically, I mean, there's a riff in the book about different points in time where different critics are decrying something similar to what I'm saying about. Like there's one where someone's talking about how short letter writing has gotten in the late 19th century. It's like we never sit down over a good few pages of letters. We just dash off these short notes to each other. And there's another one that's really upset about the fact that during the kind of magazine boom of the late 19th century that says that, around the fire in the evening time, all family members assemble, none talking to each other, each in their own magazine. And so, and then to sort of penetrate more deeply your point about this kind of wrestling with dominion over our own mind, being comfortable with it, with not having stimulus, is a problem as old as the Buddha sitting under the banyan tree in 600 BCE, or the Stoics talking about this during Roman times. So what I would say is, yes, there is continuity here with a profound problem of the human condition, which is how we live with our own mind, which we can never outrun, and that we are stuck with for all of our lives. The desire for diversion and stimulation, which is something thought about and written about going all the way back into all conditions of what we would call civilizational life.
Yeah.
I do think there's something distinct now. And it might just be that this trend has ratcheted up. But I think there's a few things that make this different. One is the sheer ubiquity. The introduction of the smartphone truly does create this kind of portal in which the amount of time that you can have boundless diversion expands to be essentially every waking second. That's never really been true before. Like people carried around books or magazines, right? But eventually you'd end that, right? The scale at which the platforms are operating is also totally unprecedented. ByteDance has 1.5 billion users, Meta has 2 billion. There's never been pooled and aggregated attention globally at the scale that we're having now. And then a third feature that I think really makes it distinct is both the sophistication of the technology and the fact that, unlike prior technologies, whether TV, radio, or the magazines being decried, they are able to individually tag and address each of you as a social being. And the reason that's so important is because there's a third aspect of attention that I talk about, which is social attention.
Yeah.
Essential to our species is that from the instant that we come squalling into the world, we are dependent on the attention of some other person or people for our survival. We can't do anything unless we are attended to. Now, ultimately, what we want as humans is more than attention. We want care and love and support and friendship and all the things that make a fulfilling life. But social attention is a necessary precondition. And what that means is that we are incredibly drawn to social attention. Attention isn't something that we just wield towards other people or thoughts or things. It's something wielded towards us we receive. And there's this phenomenon in the literature called the cocktail party effect, which is that if you are in a conversation at a party and there's a bunch of conversations going on, you're not hearing any of them. You're screening them out. But if someone says your name, it will wrench your attention away. And this is actually replicated in laboratory environments.
Right.
And the ability to wrench your attention away by your name is a testament to the power of this social attention, which is now in the hands of these platforms, which can engineer it in a way that the television couldn't talk to me, right? The radio couldn't do, they tried, headline writers. The closest example we have is the infamous recruitment poster from the United States government, which is Uncle Sam Wants You.
Right.
And that finger, which is actually based on a recruiting poster from World War I in the UK, when a guy in the British Army realized that there was going to be a world war and they didn't have nearly enough men under arms. That you that's in the Uncle Sam poster is now literalized in the technology. And so I think all those things make it new. I think all those things make it new and distinct. Let me say one more thing.
Yeah.
I also think it's possible I'm wrong and it's not new and distinct, but it's still worth wrestling with.
Uh-huh.
Like, there was a review in the New Yorker that sort of made the case that, everyone always freaks out about that. And there's part of me that thinks, but there's also a reason that people still read Walden Pond by Thoreau. You don't read that and be like, well, it got a lot worse, buddy. Why were you so upset with all the stimulus? Right. He's describing something profound about conditions of modernity, even if it looks kind of quaint in retrospect.
It's interesting you should take that example because Thoreau and the Transcendentalists had a kind of solution to this. They would withdraw completely from society. We're in a synagogue, and I actually was thinking about how this might apply to some Jewish thought, and I don't know if Rabbi Graubart is here, but he spoke very generously with me about it, and people in synagogues or observant Jews have a notion of working 6 days, part of the command, and then the time sort of cleaved off. And let me follow through with that for a second. What do you think about this as a sort of strategy. One way to look at it is you really do it, you recharge, you are sort of in a different time, and then you begin on Sunday and you're refreshed. The other way of thinking about it is you refresh, and then Sunday it's all over again. And in fact, Rabbi Graubart actually said that even the Orthodox community now has been sneaking the digital phones on Shabbat. But this sort of strategy of let's just see if we can't segregate out and that as a kind of tonic. Thoughts?
Oh, I think it's a brilliant and profound insight. The observation of a Sabbath, and the notion of rest.
Yeah.
And the notion of unplugging from diversion, the notion of also occupying ourselves with other people we're in communion with, and also, prayer is a practice of attention. That's
total. I mean,
that is what it is.
The rabbi was telling you, get to the beginning of the Midah. That's exactly what you're just really preparing.
And I remember, in the same way, I was raised Catholic. In the same way you can remember reading the cereal box, I remember sitting in church on Sunday morning.
Right. What do I do now?
Just being like, I can't believe how bored I am. Like, this is the most oppressive boredom that anyone has ever experienced.
That could never happen
It's
here, though,
just,
right?
And I remember going through, I had elaborate practices I would do. I would memorize the digits of pi to pass the time.
You had him down there, you mean?
What's that? I had written it on a paper that I then would put in my pocket.
Okay.
And that would be a way that I would battle with 3.141592653589793. And I also remember thinking about baseball statistics.
Uh-huh.
But the point of all this, and the reason I'm saying this is, that was an enforced form of boredom or absence of diversion, rest, total rest. And the absence can be filled with penitent prayer, if you were a more spiritually gifted child than I was. Or it could be filled with memorizing pi. But the idea of Shabbat and the idea of real rest, I think, is ever more important now than it probably has ever been.
Yeah. Okay, it's probably occurred to you, as I was reading, I was continually put in mind of my role as a parent. Mm-hmm. You have 3 kids, they're a little younger than ours, but there's a way in which I was nodding and thinking, what would my kids think? And they would think, as you probably can, that I'm an old fart. And because they are I see them on the couch, and they're just like this. It has to have been, as you were writing, that this idea came to you repetitively. But they would say, so you do make, we don't have time, unfortunately, to go through it, but involuntary, voluntary, but then social attention, without which you die, is part of the thesis here. So my kids on the couch would assert, what are you talking about? I'm getting input, and I'm learning things and social stuff, and there's my music, and I'm blah, 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 blah. And what's your response to that? One more quick point. You analogize these conversations to real conversations as regular games, sort of video games. So, but, do all our children just have it way wrong, or what's your thought of this as a parent?
So I actually think it's worth distinguishing some different things.
Yeah.
And I'm more aligned with the kids on this than you might expect. So one thing I think is actually important is to sort of distinguish between the structures of the technologies. Like, one thing I write about in the book is that I think texting with your friends is great. I like group chats and texting with friends. That they can be toxic.
Wait a few years.
Well, but here's the thing: those that can be toxic and terrible. Yeah. But that's just toxic and terrible in the way that people are toxic and terrible. You know what I mean? Like, teenage girls being mean to each other, because they can do it online now through text as opposed to in person is not. I don't think that different. And the difference between the group chat to me and Instagram and other platforms is that the group chat is not a place where that attention is being monetized. And I think that actually matters. If you are interacting, like my daughter, my 13-year-old daughter, Sometimes I go up into her room, and she'll still be up when I get home because she has so much work. It's a little much, I think, frankly.
Wait a while.
But she'll be on FaceTime sort of doing homework with a friend. And I think that's a great use of the technology. Like, is it a little distracted? Yes. But fundamentally, it kind of makes the homework time a little social. I used to do that all the time with my friends when we would like go to the library after school waiting for practice, and we'd do it together. So I think there are forms of the technology where you're using it for social purposes that are not existing in spheres that are engineered solely to commercialize the maximum amount of your attention.
Okay, so it's a really important point in the book, I think.
Now, there's other stuff like video games and all this stuff that clearly are engineered for that
What's
purpose.
wrong with the kids today? Yeah. But, I mean, you do posit that at the beginning, the dawn of the internet age, it seemed promising and something did happen, and it basically feels about capitalism and monetizing. And in fact, this is the question. There's a definite analogy in the book, a whole chapter where the attention age is compared to the labor, to a straight sort of Marxist analysis under which our labor is alienated from us. And your suggestion is that in the attention age, out now anyway, once it's become so much a bombardment of people seeking to make money from us one way or another, that our attention in the same way is alienated. And I guess my question is, whether you mean that, Chris, as a sort of rich metaphor, or do you mean it as a sort of strict point and analogy? No, attention age is to alienation of attention as industrial age is to alienation of labor.
I mean it pretty strictly. I mean, I don't think necessarily. The basic argument runs like this, right? That what happens in the Industrial Revolution and the sort of dawn of industrial capitalism is that humans have always worked in some way or the other. I mean, humans are doing things with their physical and mental effort through survival, since we're here, that the work is transformed into this market good with a market price called a wage. A bunch of institutions, legal regimes, technologies, forms of association are created to channel and homogenize the production of that work as wage work, as labor. And that is commodified and sold. One of Marx's key insights, and you don't have to be a Marxist to, I think, see this, I'm not one, is that was a very alienating experience for the worker. Something that used to be within you or used to be seasonal, for instance, like even if you were...
Yours.
Even if you were not, it wasn't yours because you were a feudal, you were working on someone's farm, you did do different things during different parts of the year. Like you harvested, you grew, you did things in the winter. The life of 12 hours a day stamping a sole in a sweatshop 6 days a week to produce a good that you don't own, whose value lies totally outside of you, is a very alienating experience. And one of the really important features here, and the place where I mean this metaphor kind of most literally, is there was a weird aspect to the value of labor that Marx was working through when he's talking about his labor theory of value, and it goes like this. The aggregate value of all labor is the necessary precondition for the entire Industrial Revolution, right? If there's no factories and there's no one making the stuff, you just don't get the Industrial Revolution. You need the wage labor, but you need it in the aggregate. So in the aggregate, it's the most valuable thing. The individual slice that each worker had was a pittance. Your individual wage labor to stamp the soles of the shoe every day gets you nothing. You're in penury, right? And yet, to you, it's the most valuable thing you have. It's your whole life. You're going to spend 60 to 70 hours, your whole waking life, stamping the sole of that shoe. That in a market exchange is worth nothing, essentially, barely enough to make a living on, but in the aggregate is the sum total of value that powers the great fortunes that the capitalists create. Attention has the exact same structure. If you can aggregate all of the attention, like large platforms do at scale, you make world historical fortunes. the hundreds of billions and billions of dollars that are the largest corporations like Google, for instance, or Meta. Your individual slice of it, when there's an algorithmic auction taking place in the micro instant you load up an Instagram reel to see what ad to sell you, costs nothing. It's fractions of a penny. And yet the value of your attention to you is essentially priceless. It's all you have. So you have this exact same strange sort of paradox of value that Marx is describing in Labor in the way attention works now, and it's that experience of this weird change between like how much it matters to you, how much it's being purchased for in the market, and how much it's valued in the aggregate that produces a feeling of alienation that I think is the essential, pernicious, ubiquitous sensation of the age. A kind of like car sickness of the soul. A kind of woozy feeling, a sort of vertigo that comes from this sort of extractive phenomenon.
And is it, as you were, and there are some beautiful images in the book of just that, is it that your attention in some sense is not your own, or it's just because you're so much on an auction block being bombarded by the metas of the world every day, it's vertiginous, but it's not, or is it really
I
like...
think it's not your own. It's being extracted from you and sold. It's being extracted from you and sold. And the fundamental insight, the feeling of alienation is a thing that should be internal to you that is external from you.
This is a little off that point, but it's my personal current obsession, which is just the nature of disinformation in society and lies and their relationship.
They seem like they're doing pretty well.
So far, lies are doing good, right?
Lies are having a good run.
They're better than Bitcoin, right? We could, but the thing about them is, so you think about the megaphone as attracting everyone's attention, but we have this really odd state of affairs where there are certain people that, people are in their own silos with their own megaphones in there, and it means that there's really very little chance to kind of penetrate, and in a way, the discourse becomes so impoverished because you can't even begin from a common premise of what's true, and what, so it's, as you say, about attention, and yet there are different purveyors, or I guess, franchises or whatever. Does that relate to the whole attention problem?
Oh, totally. I think one of the things you see is that in the same way that these sort of, when you think about like really intensely competitive attention markets, think of a casino floor is a great example, right? Every square inch is like trying to attract your attention because every square inch produces money from that attention if it can get you to come play the game. Times Square is another example. The restrained space of the supermarket checkout counter where the tabloids live, right? That's a very competitive attention market, right? People have to stand there in line. There's only so much space. They're competing each of those covers with the ones here and the ones there, right? And what do? You get, the lurid and the prurient and the... But you also get...
You talk about meditating, in a strip club.
Trying to meditate in a strip club.
That's like an image that stayed with me. Yeah, okay, anyway, go. Yeah.
Sorry, Rabbi.
Yeah.
And so in all of those cases, let's stay with the tabloid, right? What do they also produce? They also produce stuff that's not true. And the reason is that if all you're competing for is on attentional terms, it is often the case that lies outcompete the truth.
Yeah.
Like, very attentionally salient lies. We have this great phrase you learn when you're early as a reporter or a journalist called too good to check.
Yeah.
And what too good to check captures is that sometimes you'll hear a story as a young reporter from one source and you're like, oh my God, I'm sitting on a Pulitzer. That's crazy. You have just told me there's this enormous, and you go to an editor and they'll say, that sounds a little too good to check. Yeah. Too good to check means it's a great story until you start reporting it out. And then the truth turns out to be way more complicated and less attention grabbing and compelling than the too good to check for. Like, Donald Trump is the king of too good to check. Like, everything he says is too good. It's like, it's all about what's potentially compelling. And so, to your point, like, I do think, particularly when you don't have journalistic outfits that feel some vestigial sense of an ethos, that their job is to try to get things right, which doesn't mean they always do, but they have an ethos other than purely getting people's attention, right? They're trying to do something else other than get people's attention. They're trying to do something with that attention. When you have an information environment like the one we have that is mostly getting people information through competitive attention markets without that ethos, you're going to select for a lot of lies. You are going to produce, in that environment, a lot of attentionally salient and compelling lies.
Okay, and this moves us to where I suppose we need to spend some time talking about the president. You actually...
Again, I think things are going well.
Okay. You're bullish on
pretty much
lies,
best case
if
scenario
not on the Constitution. But look, you talk about him. From 2015, you analogize him as someone who is running naked through the neighborhood. And the sense is this kind of repellent, think about that for a moment with the actual...
You're welcome.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thing about attention, right? You've just Velcroed that in. We're never going to lose that image. But you talk about, in this point, about having exchanged attention for persuasion. And so my question is this: is his ability, or ability of demagogues, to capture attention actually related, and I don't mean this in a simply nasty way, but to his being a repugnant person? In other words, do you see the lies as, is it something about his negativity that sort of sucks everyone in, and that is the kind of key insight for him? It's not just part of the territory, it's a feature, not a bug, as it were.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's worth, again, like I said when I was talking about these sort of problems of boredom and quoting Pascal or the Buddha, like there are two things happening here. One is kind of old and timeless, and one is contemporary and distinct. So the old and timeless thing is that, the reason we have a Greek word for demagogue is because in the inception of Athenian democracy, they had figures like demagogues. So the idea that you could, through a kind of aggressive populist posturing around lies and lost honor and purity, marshal groups of people to kind of confer inordinate authority on you as the primal threat to a democracy, is as old as our understanding of Western democracy. So in that way, this isn't quite a new problem. It's also a problem the founders spend a lot of time on. A lot of time.
They described him. Federalist 10, right?
Federalist 10 describes it perfectly, right? So this is something, so in that sense, it is striking how classically cut from the cloth he is. And go back and read, you can read Huey Long's speeches, you could look at Joe McCarthy, you could look at European examples. So in that sense, the thing that makes him distinctly suited for the age is that he has born, I think, of a deep brokenness within him, a feral and unerring sense for getting maximal attention at all times.
Yeah.
And the trade-off that he makes, the one trick, the hack, is that he'll take negative attention over no attention.
Right.
And most politicians aren't like that. Most people aren't like that. Frankly, if I was in this room and all of you hated me, I would just skip the event. I would.
No,
I'd rather honestly, and I think most people are like that. I mean, and it takes a certain kind of strange.
Yeah, and it almost seems also it's combined with a kind of insatiable desire nevertheless to be right.
Those two things are so related.
Yeah.
I mean, you see it in Musk too.
Yeah.
It's this kind of broken addictive thing where he does want to be loved.
Yeah.
But he also, some sick part of him likes the negative attention, but it also fuels him. And so he's constantly in this, and Musk is now in the same, I think Musk has basically pickled his brain in the brine of Twitter so much that
Pickled. Can I? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I think it's true.
Yeah.
And I think that
Yeah.
But this is this attentional domination. I mean, even just compare the way that he's performed the presidency in the first 2 weeks to any other president or even any senator. He is.
I mean, what happens
He's in front of the cameras constantly.
Right.
He's got reporters. He's taking reporters from questions from reporters constantly. I mean, they're hostile questions. They're not like patty cake. It's like,
I did a panel with the media today, and Jonathan Carl was one of them from, George the Weekend Review. He talked about, he had trouble getting the assistant press secretary for Kamala Harris on the phone. Trump would call him. And this during the campaign, he really did need it. And there is something there because it strikes me that it's not simply lies, because there's been a lot of attempts to imitate Trump, DeSantis, and who are perfectly willing, the whole party, frankly, to tell lies. But there's some X factor, and it might be this intuition of what is truly the next running naked through the streets.
Yeah, I think if I think part of the thing when people perceive something authentic about Donald Trump, what they are perceiving is that this desperate desire for this thing is authentic to him.
Yeah.
He is not faking that brokenness. The brokenness is authentic, and it's almost transparent and palpable. And if you try to fake it, then you get Ron DeSantis. Like, if you try to sit down with people and reverse engineer that particular relationship to attention, then you get DeSantis, and people are like, "Ooh," like complete uncanny valley repulsion.
Can you take your clothes off and start running, please? Yeah.
But it's also. Let me make one more point that I think is important: is that this idea of this trade-off between negative attention for maximal attention. The insight that a lot of Democratic politicians particularly have, and a lot of traditional politicians, it's not crazy. Like, one of the interesting things about the Trump era is all of the Trump wannabes have done very poorly.
Right.
So they have lost, I would say between 8 and 12 winnable statewide races on candidates like Kerry Lake in Arizona and Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania and Blake Masters, that weird guy who did the video with his gun silencer, which was just creepy and bizarre. And the reason they've won that is because they've ended up on the wrong side of that trade.
Yeah.
Mark Robinson is my favorite example. Mark Robinson is larger-than-life, outsized, outrageous figure in North Carolina, who was the lieutenant governor, ran for governor, and was constantly saying, terrible things, and some people need killing and all this nonsense.
A few other problems arose also.
Well, they also discovered that he was posting on a website called Nude Africa, where including such lines as, "I am a black Nazi," which is, if you were to engineer, like, what's the worst thing you could say?
Especially
running
now.
for office in North Carolina, it's pretty up there. Like, I am a black Nazi. I mean, so Mark Robinson gets his butt kicked and he loses by 12 or 13 points, like 53 to 40, which is kind of what it always feels like Trump should be. Like, that feels like that. Like, if you told me Trump got 40% of the vote, I'd be like, basically there's 40% that'll vote for anyone with a certain letter next to their name.
2 weeks into he's at 42 again, where it's been perennially pretty much.
And I think, but it's important just not to overstate the case. So there is something a little sui generis and singular about this kind of running naked through the neighborhood approach. Okay,
so does that mean then that when Trump one day is no longer a
rendered
virus
obsolete by actuarial math,
for example, which in his case, by the way, he's got good longevity genes. So is that then? I mean, do you see a healthier model of political discourse? We're at a certain point in the attention age, and Trump's the paradigm of it, and we're being bombarded like this, and lies, as you say, and outrage have privilege of place. We're there. We're not going back from there, maybe on Saturdays occasionally. What prospects does that give for what comes next? is there a healthy political discourse in our future?
Well, I can't say. All I know, I believe profoundly, viscerally, partly as a matter of faith, but genuinely, that there is this backlash to all of this brewing. It's like watching a spring get pushed down. And if you survey, like, people don't like the texture of daily life that has been wrought by the attention age. Even though Donald Trump won an election, and he won it, and he won the popular vote, he is fatiguing to even people that vote for him. And this sensation of the constant Sirens Call on us is going to produce an enormous backlash. I don't know how that will be channeled, what figures will channel it. I think sometimes you think of like, well, what would be a Donald Trump of the left? Or like, how do you fight fire with fire? But the other thing you could do is fight fire with water.
Right.
And, you know, the best example I have of this is that I remember waking up on the morning after Election Day in 2005 when George W. Bush won re-election. And
Ohio.
it was like, you libs, you out-of-touch libs, you need like a Texas guy with a ranch who is tough, and he's tough on the terrorists, and normal people, regular Americans want to have a beer with. And then it was like, how about a community organizer / constitutional law professor named Barack Hussein Obama from Hyde Park, Chicago? Like that, and the idea that that was actually what was needed was not on a lot of people's radar. In the same way that like Ron DeSantis tried to kind of like sketch out a blueprint and reverse engineer something in response, you know, to outcompete Trump, I don't think that's the way this works. And I'm not a prophet, and I don't know what comes up next. I just know that there's this great Steve Jobs line, ironically enough, that I think about all the time, where he said, "It's not the customer's job to know what they want." He's like, "It's our job to show them something that they then decide they want." And politics is the same way. Like, you could do all the polling in the world, and that works in the aggregate, and it works if you're telling frontline members how a frontline member should run a race and which way they should vote on the Lake and Riley bill and all that stuff. And I don't want to take away from that. But at the highest level of politics, presidential national politics, at the highest level of sort of attention, you need people to think out past the frontier and to innovate. And I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. And I'll just say, I mean, I feel like I'm quite alarmed about these few weeks. I think we're already sort of on fire. But that means to me, there's one universe where we are hungry. There's another universe where we do have enough to come back. And in that universe, there's going to be a lot of splaining to do by, you know, people who have come all in, right? So almost like, you know, Germany after the war, say. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I hope.
Right.
Yeah.
We hope.
But let me say something on that.
Yeah.
I think this is really important. I keep thinking about this great headline from The Onion in 2004, which was roughly, I actually tried to Google it today and I couldn't find it, so maybe I've invented it, but I remember it basically going of Iraqis stunned by competence of Bush campaign. Yeah. And I remember it because it did such a good job of communicating this really important point, which was they ran a really good re-election, but it didn't mean squat about whether they were actually a competent group of actors.
Okay.
And then we got Katrina, the Iraq war going completely sideways, and of course the largest financial crash in. And my biggest hope for this current administration is that they are a political catastrophe without being a substantive one.
Right.
Which is difficult because, to be clear, we're all on the same ship here. Like a bird flu outbreak is not good.
You don't think RFK Jr.'s got this covered?
Talking Feds is supported by the Brennan Center for Justice. In this new political era, the Brennan Center will do what they do best: defend the Constitution and the rule of law. They're prepared to fight against presidential overreach and will continue advocating for reforms to resist weaponized government, stop billionaires from corrupting our elections, and ensure every eligible American has the freedom to vote. Stay informed by visiting brennancenter.org.
How do you feel about a lightning round? We've done that with...
Great, yeah, let's do a lightning round.
All right, we're going to do a lightning round. When it hits, we've got 10 seconds for it to hit 0, and you've got a minute for 10 seconds, okay?
Let's do it.
A novel you love.
A separate piece.
Something memorable your parents told you.
Always go to the funeral.
The likely music on your car right now.
Taylor Swift.
Mets or Yankees?
Neither.
Political philosopher who most influenced you.
Camus.
Fox broadcaster you secretly admire.
Pass. I cannot tell a lie.
No. Guys, you're taking up his time. He's
Go.
running out. Brain dead movie you love?
Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Last time you danced?
At a party last week.
Did Oswald act alone?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
True or false? People are basically good.
True.
Favorite former Supreme Court clerk?
Catherine Shaw.
There you go. And favorite coastal city near the Mexican border?
San Diego. I'm gonna, if I ever do a lightning round, I am stealing Did Oswald Act Alone? That is so good to just wedge in there.
If I can have your lines from tonight, I make up like a bandit. All right, we only have one sort of question, and as you say, you diagnose a very big problem. You don't, it would be enough just, and it is enough just there, but you do have some tentative directions toward some solutions. They basically, as I understand them, have to do with the capitalist model, the alienation being removed from things, even by regulation, which obviously would be, pretty harsh. We are on the advent of a world that many people think of as completely Promethean in developments with artificial intelligence and the like. Putting it in a slightly positive note to end, is there an aspect of technological development that gives you most hope about the future?
I'm going to answer this in two ways. The actual things happening in AI are genuinely thrilling. If you play around, if you've gotten to play around with the LLM models, as someone who studied the philosophy of mind, who thought about this problem, for years there was this debate of, can we create an intelligent mind just through circuitry if we're doing it massively parallel and scaled enough? And we have an answer now.
Hinton actually says they are conscious now. But
anyway. That's a bridge further than I'm willing to go.
I agree, but go ahead, yeah.
The most important technology of our time is democracy. Democracy is best understood. Thank you. Democracy is best understood as one of the core technological innovations of human beings. And it is the best ever developed technology for managing the conflict endemic to human affairs. All human life produces conflict. Democracy is the most exceptional technology ever created to manage that conflict in a way that maximizes human flourishing, human dignity, and security. And so whatever technology is incubated in Silicon Valley, whatever technology is going to show up on our phones, we actually have at our disposal one of the greatest technologies ever. And that is what we should be working on to sort of vouchsafe.
Please join me in thanking the author of the #1 best-selling book, Chris Hayes.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.